This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And thanks for joining us. Glad to have you with us this week. Let's jump right into the action. You've no doubt become familiar with the outcome of Tuesday night's elections in Arkansas. The big winners. Donald Trump led the GOP presidential field. Hillary Clinton trounced Bernie Sanders. Senator John Bozeman and 2nd District Congressman French Hill with easy primary victories. And a new Supreme Court Chief Justice elected, Judge Dan Kemp. There was record turnout in the Republican primaries, and with only the presidential race and a handful of legislative primaries on the Democratic side, it was some slim pickings. Here's your vote totals. All of the votes cast in the primary, a little more than 639,000. In the Democratic presidential contest, more than 220,000 registered their votes. On the GOP side, nearly 410,000 votes cast. And in the GOP Senate race, you had about 388,785. That's about 5% off of the presidential numbers there. Joining me now is Janelle Lilley. She is KATV's lead Capitol reporter. She is here to run through some other interesting stats from that night. And Janelle, let's start with the Republican presidential field here.
Looks pretty red to me. And of course, in our map, red is for Donald Trump. Most of the counties in our state going towards Donald Trump. The significant portions that didn't, you can see highlighted in orange, which went for Cruz, and then yellow, which went for Rubio. I think the map looks pretty red from here, and as a result, we can talk about delegate counts. Donald Trump walked away with 16, make that 16. Ted Cruz walked away with 14, and Marco Rubio walked away with 9 delegates.
I'll tell you what's also interesting to me in this is you've got Marco Rubio, the so-called establishment candidate, winning Pulaski County and Benton County. Those are establishment GOP bases. Ted Cruz winning that donut and some of the more evangelical and church areas.
As you mentioned, this is the Texas market, right down here, television market. So you can see one of the reasons that
most everything else red, like you said.
Everything else is red, and it was pretty clear. Those early numbers coming in for us, it really made it significant view.
On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, not much trouble with Bernie Sanders.
You know what? Almost every county in our state, except Newton County, went for Hillary Clinton. No surprise there, and honestly, not much of a contest in most of those states either. She had a significant lead in most of the counties either. She had a significant lead in almost every single county. As far as delegates come, though, a lot closer. 22 for Hillary Clinton, 10 for Bernie Sanders. So the delegate count not necessarily reflecting the
landslide,
map.
Really,
what it looks like on the map.
Well, that's some very interesting information there. I want to take us to a break, and then I'm going to walk through some other early voting totals. These were overall totals. We're going to look at some early voting totals. More than a quarter of all the votes cast. It was a very representative sample of what happened in this election. And when you see these numbers, it's going to give you some additional and fascinating insight as to what we saw on Super Tuesday. Let's take a quick word from our sponsors. We're about to talk more politics right after this. And welcome back to the program. I'm Roby Brock with Janelle Lilley. All right, I'm handing it over.
All right, I have some numbers for you, several questions. First of all, what did you find while coming through the early results, the early primary voters, the early voters, what you saw as far as demographics? Yeah,
there's some interesting data in there. First of all, let me thank Bobby Kelly with Turtle Target. He helped me crawl through all of these numbers. He's a numbers cruncher data genius here. So there were 167,739 people who voted early this Super Tuesday. That is about 26% of the total voter turnout that we saw on Tuesday. Of that, about 52% were female, 84% Caucasian or white, 13% African American. And then here are the two most interesting stats to me, Janelle. One, the number of people who have only voted in one of the last 3 primaries or 0 of the last 3 primaries. In other words, infrequent primary voters. They just don't show up to vote. Look at those numbers there. 51,000 people voted. 51,000 of those, none of them had voted in the last primary. So 30%, 20% have only voted once in the last 3 primaries. So really 50% are infrequent. They're not known for showing up. And then look at this in terms of age of those voters, because Bernie Sanders appeals to the youth vote. Donald Trump's been appealing to the older generation vote. I think we see who showed up on Tuesday there. Look at that demographic. I mean, 3.9%, 8.8% under the age of 35. and then 71% 50 or older. That is huge.
71% over the age of 50. That's almost unbelievable. So how does that compare to our normal trends?
Yeah, so if you look at, let me throw a stat at you here in the, just kind of looking at some overall election results too, just to how big this was. In 2016, our primary numbers there, you had 639,000. Compare that to the general election. The general election in 2014, this is Mark Pryor versus
that was a
Tom
huge
Cotton.
race. We had Senate and
Huge.
gubernatorial in that year.
852,000. We had about a 76%
Oh my goodness.
comparable turnout there. And then in 2012, the last presidential primary, you had 315,000 voting.
More
So
than
we
double.
more than doubled that here in 2016. Isn't that crazy?
That is unbelievable, and that's extremely unusual for an election year. I'm interested to find out, as far as the statistics go, when the full numbers come in, what we see as far as the trends.
We'll be about a week away from getting some of those. The Secretary of State's office has to certify those results, and there'll be a little bit of lag time on that, but it's going to be pretty big stuff.
But really, the takeaway is that several older voters came out, and they were new voters, people who don't normally vote in elections.
And white. White voters, older voters, Republican voters. That's what we saw on Tuesday.
Interesting.
We'll see if it stands. All right. Thanks for being with us, Janelle. Appreciate you and all your insight there. Looking forward to working with you the rest of the campaign season, too.